The Belmont Crown restaurant was the kind of place most people only saw in movies. Crystal lights hung from the ceiling like frozen stars. Soft piano music floated through the air, and every table was covered with white cloth and shining silverware. Wealthy guests filled the room almost every night. Businessmen talked about million-dollar deals while couples drank expensive wine beside the tall glass windows overlooking downtown Chicago. For June Park, it was just another long shift. She moved carefully between the crowded tables, balancing trays filled with steak, seafood, and drinks that cost more than her weekly grocery bill. Her black uniform was neat, her hair tied back tightly, and her face carried the polite smile required from every employee. But behind that smile was exhaustion. She had worked double shifts for almost 2 months. Every morning started the same way. She woke up before sunrise in the tiny apartment she shared with her mother. After helping her mother take medicine and preparing breakfast, she rushed to work and stayed until late at night. Some days she barely slept 4 hours. Still, she never complained. Her manager, Mr. Han, respected her because she never arrived late and never argued with difficult customers. Other waiters sometimes whispered that June worked like a machine. They did not know she had no choice. Her mother's hospital bills kept growing. That Friday night, the restaurant was busier than usual because an important businessman had reserved the private dining section for a celebration dinner. Expensive cars lined the street outside while photographers waited near the entrance hoping to capture famous guests. The businessman's name was Dae-hyun Voss. Almost everyone in the city knew him. Some people admired him because he turned a small company into a giant investment empire. Others disliked him because he enjoyed embarrassing people publicly. Videos of his rude comments often spread online, but he never seemed to care. In fact, many believed he liked the attention. When Dae-hyun entered the restaurant that night, conversations immediately grew quieter. He walked confidently through the center of the room wearing a dark tailored coat while several wealthy friends followed behind him laughing loudly. Mr. Han rushed forward with a nervous smile. "Welcome back, sir," he said politely. "Your private table is ready." Dae-hyun nodded without even looking at him. June stood nearby holding a tray of drinks. She lowered her eyes and quietly stepped aside to let the group pass. She hoped none of them would notice her. Customers like these often treated staff like invisible objects. Unfortunately, Dae-hyun noticed everything. As he walked past, he suddenly stopped. His eyes moved toward the grand piano resting near the small stage beside the windows. It was mostly used by hired musicians during special events. Tonight, the piano sat empty because the scheduled performer had canceled at the last minute. Then he noticed June glancing at it. It was only for a second, but he caught it. A small smile appeared on his face. "You play?" he asked suddenly. June blinked in surprise. "Sorry." "The piano," he said, pointing toward it. "You were staring at it." Several people at nearby tables turned toward them. June quickly shook her head. "No, sir. I was just looking." Dae-hyun leaned against the chair beside him. "That didn't answer my question." The room grew quieter. June felt uncomfortable under so many eyes. "A little," she admitted softly. One of the businessmen at the table laughed. "A waitress pianist? That sounds interesting." Another guest smirked. "Maybe she's secretly famous." June forced a small smile and tried to step away, but Dae-hyun raised his hand. "Wait." She froze. An amused look spread across his face, as though he had just discovered a new game to play. "How good are you?" he asked. June tightened her grip on the tray. "I haven't played in a long time." "That bad?" A few guests laughed quietly. Her cheeks warmed with embarrassment, but she stayed calm. "I should get back to work, sir." But Dae-hyun was not finished. He looked around at the crowd enjoying the scene. Then he spoke loudly enough for half the restaurant to hear. "I'll give you $5,000 if you can play one full song without mistakes." The laughter grew louder. Several guests immediately pulled out their phones. June stood completely still. For a moment, she thought she had heard wrong. $5,000. That amount could cover almost 2 months of her mother's treatment. But the way he said it made her chest tighten. It was not kindness. It was entertainment. Mr. Han quickly stepped forward. Sir, perhaps we should. No. Dae-hyun interrupted casually. This is harmless fun. Then he looked directly at Ji-yoon again. Well, the restaurant had become strangely silent now. Everyone waited for her answer. Ji-yoon could feel their eyes on her face, her uniform, her shaking hands. Part of her wanted to walk away immediately. Another part remembered the overdue hospital notices sitting on the kitchen table at home. $5,000. She swallowed slowly. I don't think that's a good idea, she whispered. Dae-hyun shrugged dramatically. Then I guess you're not confident enough. One of his friends chuckled. Maybe she only knows nursery songs. More laughter followed. Ji-yoon lowered her eyes. For years she had trained herself to stay invisible. Life became easier that way. Invisible people avoided humiliation. Invisible people survived. But something inside her slowly started changing. Her gaze moved toward the piano again. Memories returned before she could stop them. Long practice rooms. Cold winter mornings in Seoul. Her father smiling proudly beside old music sheets. Crowds clapping. Then hospital rooms. Funeral clothes. Debt. Goodbye letters. America. The memories hit her all at once. She had spent years trying to bury that part of herself. Now a stranger was turning it into a joke. Dae-hyun leaned back in his chair, clearly expecting her refusal. Instead, Ji-yoon quietly placed the tray onto a nearby counter. The movement surprised everyone. She looked at Mr. Han first. I'll return to work after one song. The manager looked worried but nodded carefully. Then she faced Dae-hyun. Okay, she said softly. I'll do it. A wave of whispers spread across the restaurant. Someone near the back muttered, This should be interesting. Phones lifted higher to record. Dae-hyun smiled with satisfaction and gestured toward the stage like a king allowing a performance. Please, he said dramatically. Ji-yoon walked slowly toward the piano. Every step felt heavier than the last. The restaurant lights suddenly seemed too bright. The sound of heels against the polished floor echoed through the room while conversations faded into silence. When she reached the piano bench, she stopped. Her fingers hovered slightly above the smooth black surface. It had been years since she touched a piano in public. Years since anyone listened. She sat down carefully. For a few seconds, she simply stared at the keys. Her heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear anything else. She knew people expected failure. She could almost feel their amusement. A waitress trying to impress rich strangers. How pathetic. Her hands trembled slightly. Then she remembered her mother sitting weakly beside the apartment window earlier that morning, pretending not to worry about money. Ji-yoon closed her eyes briefly. She took one slow breath. When her fingers touched the first key, the entire room became silent. The note rang softly through the restaurant like a drop of water in a still lake. Then came another note, and another. Within seconds, the atmosphere changed completely. The laughter disappeared. Guests who were smirking moments earlier slowly straightened in their seats. Ji-yoon's fingers moved gently at first, then with growing confidence across the piano keys. The melody carried sadness, warmth, and something deeper that words could not explain. Even the waiters stopped walking. In the kitchen doorway, cooks stood frozen listening. Dae-hyun's smile slowly faded. This was not amateur playing. Not even close. Ji-yoon no longer looked like a tired waitress under the restaurant lights. She looked completely different sitting behind the piano. As if the music had awakened a hidden part of her the world had forgotten. The room stayed silent except for the sound of the piano. And for the first time that night, nobody was laughing anymore. The music continued flowing through the restaurant like a quiet storm. Ji-yoon's fingers moved naturally across the piano keys. Faster now, smoother, filled with emotion that seemed impossible for someone who claimed she had not played in years. Every note carried feeling behind it. It was not just music. It sounded like memories, pain, hope, and loneliness all mixed together. Nobody in the Belmont Crown expected this. A few minutes earlier, customers were laughing at the idea of a waitress playing piano in front of wealthy strangers. Now those same people sat frozen in complete silence. Near the back of the room, a young couple slowly lowered their phones. They had started recording to capture an embarrassing moment for social media, but now they simply stared at Ji-yoon in shock. Even the sound of dishes from the kitchen had stopped. Mr. Han stood near the entrance with wide eyes. He had worked with Ji-yoon for almost 2 years. Yet he suddenly realized he knew almost nothing about her life before the restaurant. One waiter whispered softly beside him, "How is she this good?" Mr. Han shook his head slowly. "I had no idea." At the center table, Daehyun Vas sat unusually still. The confident amusement that once filled his face was fading little by little. His friends no longer laughed or made jokes. One of them even leaned closer to the stage as if trying to understand what he was hearing. Ji-yoon kept her eyes on the piano keys. The outside world slowly disappeared around her. For the first time in many years, she felt connected to herself again. The music carried her back to another life. Back to Seoul. Back to a small apartment filled with old music books and warm late-night conversations. Her father used to sit beside her while she practiced for hours every evening. He worked long shifts at a factory, but no matter how tired he was, he always listened to her play. "You don't play with your hands," he once told her when she was 13. "You play with your heart. That's why people remember your music." At the time, she did not fully understand those words. Now she finally did. As Ji-yoon continued playing, an older man sitting near the restaurant window slowly straightened in his chair. His silver hair and calm appearance made him look different from the noisy businessmen around him. His name was Min-suk Choi. Most people inside the restaurant did not recognize him, but years earlier he had been a respected judge in international music competitions across Asia and Europe. The moment Ji-yoon began playing, something about her style felt strangely familiar to him. At first, he thought it was only coincidence. But as the melody grew stronger, his expression slowly changed. He stared at her carefully, the way she moved her left hand, the timing of her pauses, the emotion in certain notes. His heart suddenly began beating faster. "No," he whispered quietly to himself. Beside him, his wife looked confused. "What is it?" Min-suk did not answer immediately. His eyes never left Ji-yoon. He remembered a young Korean girl from many years ago, a child pianist who shocked audiences during a youth competition in Busan. Judges called her one of the brightest talents they had seen in decades. Then suddenly she disappeared. No interviews, no concerts, nothing. The music world quietly forgot her over time. But Min-suk never completely forgot the girl whose performance once brought an entire hall to tears. Now, sitting in a luxury restaurant thousands of miles from Korea, he felt like he was hearing that same soul again. At the piano, Ji-yoon reached the middle of the piece. Her nervousness was gone now. The trembling in her hands disappeared completely. The crowd no longer existed. Only the music mattered. She remembered the last time she had performed publicly. She was 16 years old, wearing a pale blue dress while bright stage lights blinded her eyes. Her father had waited backstage holding flowers for her after the performance. 3 weeks later, he died in a traffic accident while driving home from work during heavy rain. Everything changed after that. Debt swallowed the family quickly. Her mother worked endlessly trying to survive while Ji-yoon abandoned competitions and music lessons to support her. When they eventually moved to America for a fresh start, she promised herself she would never touch a piano again. It hurt too much. Music reminded her of everything she lost. But tonight, sitting in front of strangers, those buried emotions returned stronger than ever. A soft tear rolled down her cheek while she played. Several guests noticed. One woman near the front quietly wiped her own eyes. The restaurant no longer felt like a place for rich businessmen and expensive dinners. For those few minutes, it felt deeply human. Everyone in the room could sense the emotion hidden inside the melody even if they could not explain it. Daehyun slowly leaned forward in his chair. Something about Ji-yoon's performance made him uncomfortable in a way he had not expected. He originally wanted entertainment. Instead, he felt exposed. Ashamed almost, because while everyone watched Ji-yoon play, they also remembered how this moment started. With humiliation, with laughter, with him treating her like a joke. One of his business partners quietly muttered, "She's incredible." Dae-hyun said nothing. Near the kitchen hallway, two younger waitresses whispered nervously. "She could have been famous," one said. "She still can," the other replied softly. The music continued building with emotion until the entire restaurant seemed trapped inside it. Outside the tall windows, snow slowly began falling onto the Chicago streets. Car lights reflected against the glass while the warm glow inside the restaurant surrounded Ji-yoon like a spotlight. Then something unexpected happened. An older customer sitting alone near the stage suddenly stood up. The movement caught several people's attention immediately. It was Min-suk Choi. His eyes looked stunned. He slowly stepped closer to the piano without caring that people were staring at him. Ji-yoon did not notice. She remained lost in the performance. Min-suk's breathing became uneven. He could not believe what he was hearing. "It's her," he whispered. His wife followed behind him carefully. "Are you certain?" He nodded slowly without taking his eyes off Ji-yoon. "I never forget talent like this." Some nearby guests looked confused. One man asked quietly, "Do you know her?" Min-suk answered without hesitation. "She was once one of the greatest young pianists I ever heard." The whispers spread quickly through nearby tables. "A pianist? Who is she? Was she famous?" Nobody had answers yet. At the piano, Ji-yoon reached the final section of the song. Her hands moved faster now, powerful yet controlled. Every note echoed through the silent restaurant with breathtaking precision. Even people who knew nothing about classical music understood they were witnessing something special. A waiter carrying drinks accidentally stopped walking completely, afraid to interrupt the moment. One customer quietly lowered his head, overwhelmed by emotion. Another guest stopped recording and simply listened. Dae-hyun slowly looked around the room. For the first time in years, he realized money could not control a moment like this. The attention inside the restaurant no longer belonged to him. It belonged entirely to Ji-yoon. And strangely, she did not seem to want it. There was no arrogance in her expression. No desire to impress people. She played like someone releasing years of hidden pain. As the final melody approached, Ji-yoon's breathing became shaky. Memories flooded her mind again. Her father's smile. Her mother crying quietly at night after moving to America. Endless shifts carrying trays while pretending she was fine. Dreams buried beneath survival. Then came the final notes. Soft, beautiful, heartbreaking. Her fingers slowly lifted from the piano keys. Silence filled the restaurant immediately afterward. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. It felt as if the entire room had forgotten how to breathe. Ji-yoon stared quietly at the piano, suddenly aware again of where she was. Her heart raced. Had she made mistakes? Had she embarrassed herself? The silence felt endless. Then suddenly, applause exploded across the restaurant. People rose from their seats clapping loudly. Several guests stood up completely. The sound filled every corner of the room. Ji-yoon looked shocked. Her eyes widened as she stared at the crowd. Some customers were smiling warmly at her now. Others looked emotional. A few even shouted praise toward the stage. Mr. Han clapped harder than anyone. The younger waitresses near the kitchen cheered loudly. Ji-yoon's chest tightened as emotion hit her all at once. For years she believed that part of her life was gone forever. Yet somehow, in a restaurant where people once laughed at her, she had finally found it again. Then Min-suk stepped closer to the stage. His voice trembled slightly when he spoke. "Your name," he said carefully. "Is it Ji-yoon Park?" The entire room grew quiet again. Ji-yoon looked confused. "Yes," she answered slowly. Min-suk stared at her with disbelief and emotion mixed together. "I knew it," he whispered. Dae-hyun frowned slightly. "You know her?" Min-suk turned toward him. "Know her?" he repeated softly. "Years ago, this young woman was considered one of the brightest piano talents in South Korea." Gasps spread across the restaurant. Phones immediately lifted again. Ji-yoon's face paled. She had spent years hiding from that past. Now suddenly, it stood directly in front of her.
The restaurant buzzed with whispers after Min-suk revealed Ji-yoon's past. People who had ignored her all evening were suddenly staring at her like she was someone completely different. Phones pointed toward the stage from every direction now. Some guests searched her name online while others asked questions among themselves. A famous pianist? How did she end up working here? Is this real? Ji-yoon stood slowly from the piano bench, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. Her hands still trembled slightly after the performance. A few tears remained in her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away before anyone noticed. She only wanted the night to end, but the room would not let her disappear anymore. Min-suk stepped closer with emotion written across his face. He looked at Ji-yoon as though he had found someone long lost. I remember you, he said softly. Busan International Youth Competition. You were 16. Ji-yoon lowered her gaze immediately. It was a long time ago, she replied quietly. But you're playing. Min-suk shook his head in disbelief. Nobody forgets music like that. Several guests listened closely now. Dae-hyun remained seated at his table, silent for the first time all night. His friends looked less confident too. Earlier, they treated Ji-yoon like a joke. Now the entire room admired her. The shift in atmosphere was impossible to ignore. One of the businessmen near Dae-hyun leaned toward him and muttered, "You picked the wrong person tonight." Dae-hyun did not answer. For some reason, he felt uneasy watching Ji-yoon stand alone in front of everyone. He had embarrassed people before. Public challenges and teasing were normal for him. Usually the crowd enjoyed it, and he enjoyed controlling the room. Tonight felt different, because Ji-yoon never tried to fight back. She simply sat down and revealed a world nobody expected. Mr. Han quickly approached the stage area, worried the situation was becoming too overwhelming. Everyone, he said politely, please give her some space. But customers continued whispering excitedly. A young woman near the front table suddenly spoke up. That performance was beautiful. Others nodded immediately. Another guest added, you should be performing in concert halls, not carrying trays. Ji-yoon forced a small smile, but said nothing. Compliments felt strange after years of invisibility. Meanwhile, near the back corner of the restaurant, a man in a gray coat uploaded a short video clip online. It showed only 30 seconds of Ji-yoon playing piano beneath the crystal lights of the Belmont Crown. Within minutes, views started climbing rapidly. People online were already asking the same question. Who was the mysterious waitress pianist? Ji-yoon had no idea her life was quietly changing in real time. She simply wanted to return to work before her shift became worse. I should get back, she said softly to Mr. Han. But before she could leave the stage area, Dae-hyun finally stood up from his chair. The entire room became quiet again. He slowly walked toward the piano while all eyes followed him. Ji-yoon stiffened slightly when he stopped a few feet away. For several seconds, Dae-hyun simply looked at her without speaking. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a checkbook. You earned it, he said. He quickly wrote the amount and handed her the check for $5,000. The room watched carefully. Ji-yoon stared at the paper, but did not take it immediately. Something about the moment felt uncomfortable. Not because she disliked the money. She desperately needed it. But because accepting it felt connected to the humiliation that started everything. Dae-hyun seemed to notice her hesitation. This isn't charity, he said quietly this time. You proved me wrong. Ji-yoon slowly accepted the check with both hands. Thank you, she whispered politely. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Min-suk suddenly spoke again. Do you still practice regularly? Ji-yoon gave a small shake of her head. No. You should, he replied immediately. Talent like yours should never disappear. His words caused another wave of whispers across the room. One guest nearby asked, was she really famous in Korea? Min-suk nodded. She was expected to have an international career. Ji-yoon's face tightened slightly at those words. Expected. That word hurt more than people realized. Because expectations were easy before life fell apart. Before funerals. Before hospital bills. Before survival became more important than dreams. Dae-hyun noticed the sadness in her expression. For the first time that evening, curiosity replaced amusement inside him. What happened? He asked carefully. Jiyoon looked surprised by the question. The restaurant remained silent, waiting for her answer. She clearly did not want to discuss personal matters in front of strangers. But Min-suk's appearance had already opened doors to a past she tried to bury. "My father passed away," she said softly. After that, everything changed. The simple sentence carried heavy emotion. Nobody interrupted. She stopped performing after that. Min-suk explained quietly to the crowd. Many people wondered where she went. Jiyoon glanced toward the floor. She hated attention focused on her pain. Mr. Han stepped closer protectively. "That's enough for tonight." But suddenly, applause broke out again from a table near the windows. Then another table joined. Soon almost the entire restaurant clapped once more. This applause felt different from earlier. Not excitement, respect. Jiyoon looked overwhelmed by it. One older woman smiled warmly at her and said, "Thank you for sharing your gift with us." Jiyoon bowed her head slightly. "Thank you for listening." At that exact moment, one of the younger waiters rushed over holding his phone. "Jiyoon," he whispered urgently, "look at this." Confused, she glanced at the screen. The short video uploaded minutes earlier already had thousands of views. Comments flooded rapidly. "Who is she?" "This gave me chills." "That emotion feels real." "Someone find this pianist." Jiyoon stared in shock. Her breathing became uneven again. She was not ready for this kind of attention. Not after hiding for so long. Dae-hyun quietly noticed the fear in her eyes. Most people dreamed of becoming famous online overnight. Jiyoon looked like she wanted to run away. That detail stayed in his mind. A reporter sitting at another table suddenly approached carefully. "Mississippi Park," he said politely. "Would you mind answering a few questions?" Jiyoon immediately stepped back. "No, thank you." Another guest asked if she had social media. Someone else wanted another performance. The crowd slowly started surrounding her. Mr. Han quickly intervened. "Please, everyone. She's still working." Thankfully, several customers respected his request and returned to their tables, though many continued staring toward Jiyoon with fascination. She quickly moved away from the stage area and headed toward the staff hallway near the kitchen. The moment she disappeared behind the swinging doors, she finally exhaled deeply. One of the waitresses, Hyrin, grabbed her arm excitedly. "Jiyoon, do you realize what just happened out there?" Jiyoon leaned against the wall, overwhelmed. "I don't know." "You were incredible," another waiter added. "People are literally searching your name online." Jiyoon closed her eyes briefly. Everything felt unreal. Only 30 minutes earlier, she was serving drinks and avoiding rude customers. Now strangers looked at her like some hidden celebrity. Hyrin lowered her voice. "Are you okay?" Jiyoon nodded slowly, though she was unsure herself. "I just want to finish my shift." But returning to normal suddenly felt impossible. When she stepped back onto the restaurant floor carrying another tray, conversation stopped again. Guests recognized her instantly now. Some smiled warmly. Others whispered. A few even clapped lightly as she passed their tables. Jiyoon tried to ignore the attention, but her face burned with embarrassment. At Dae-hyun's table, the atmosphere had changed completely. His friends no longer joked loudly. Instead, they quietly discussed the performance among themselves. One man shook his head. "I still can't believe she's a waitress." Dae-hyun looked toward Jiyoon serving another table. "Neither can I," he admitted. For reasons he could not explain, he kept replaying the performance in his mind. Not just the music. Her expression. The sadness behind it. He had seen many talented people in his life, but most performed for fame, money, or attention. Jiyoon played like none of those things mattered. That difference stayed with him. Near closing time, snow continued falling heavily outside the restaurant windows. Most guests slowly prepared to leave, but many stopped near Jiyoon before exiting. Some thanked her personally. Others asked where she learned piano. One elderly customer pressed her hands gently and said, "You reminded me why music matters." Each comment left Jiyoon more emotional than the last, because deep down, she had convinced herself nobody cared anymore. Around midnight, the restaurant finally became quieter. Workers cleaned tables while soft music returned through the speakers. Ji-yoon helped stack glasses near the counter, hoping the night was finally ending. Then Mr. Han approached her carefully. "There's someone asking to speak with you privately," he said. Ji-yoon looked confused. "Who?" Mr. Han glanced toward the far corner of the restaurant. Dae-hyun-vas still sat there alone, waiting. Ji-yoon's stomach tightened slightly. She honestly did not know what he could possibly want now. But something about his expression looked different from earlier. The arrogance was still there, yet beneath it was something else. Something uncertain. Ji-yoon stood near the counter, holding a stack of clean glasses while the last few customers prepared to leave the Belmont Crown restaurant. Outside, heavy snow covered the streets of Chicago in white, and the city lights reflected softly against the frozen sidewalks. Most of the excitement from earlier had finally calmed down, but the strange feeling inside the restaurant still remained. People were still talking about her. Even after the applause faded and the phone stopped recording, Ji-yoon could feel eyes following her whenever she moved across the room. She hated that feeling. For years, she had carefully built a quiet life where nobody asked questions about her past. She worked hard, stayed polite, paid bills, and returned home every night without drawing attention. Tonight destroyed that invisibility completely. Mr. Han approached again, lowering his voice. "He's still waiting." Ji-yoon glanced toward the far corner of the restaurant where Dae-hyun-vas sat alone beside the dark windows. His friends had already left nearly 20 minutes ago, but he remained there quietly, one hand resting against a glass of untouched water. For a man known for confidence and loud behavior, he suddenly looked unusually thoughtful. Ji-yoon honestly considered leaving through the kitchen exit instead. But avoiding him now would only make things more awkward. After a slow breath, she placed the glasses down carefully and walked toward his table. The sound of her footsteps echoed softly through the nearly empty restaurant. Dae-hyun looked up as she approached. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Ji-yoon stopped beside the table politely. "Did you need something, sir?" Dae-hyun gestured toward the empty chair across from him. "Please sit. I still have work. It'll only take a minute." Ji-yoon hesitated before finally sitting down carefully. She kept a professional distance between them. The silence stretched awkwardly. Then Dae-hyun surprised her by speaking quietly instead of arrogantly. "I owe you an apology." Ji-yoon blinked slightly. That was the last thing she expected to hear. Dae-hyun looked down briefly before continuing. "I embarrassed you tonight." Ji-yoon remained calm. "I'm used to difficult customers. That doesn't make it right." She studied his face carefully. He did not look like a man joking around anymore. For the first time all evening, he seemed sincere. "I thought it would be entertaining," he admitted. "I didn't think that I could actually play." Ji-yoon finished softly. Dae-hyun gave a small nod. The honesty stung more than she expected, but at least he was truthful. Ji-yoon folded her hands together quietly. Most people don't expect much from waitresses. Dae-hyun leaned back slightly, watching her expression. "You really gave up music completely?" "Yes." "Why?" Ji-yoon looked toward the snow outside the window. "My father believed music could change my life," she said softly. "After he died, survival became more important." Dae-hyun listened carefully. There was no self-pity in her voice, only exhaustion, the kind built over many years. He noticed how tired she looked now that the performance was over. Dark circles rested beneath her eyes, and her shoulders carried the weight of constant stress. "You mentioned hospital bills earlier," he said carefully. "Your mother is sick?" Ji-yoon immediately stiffened. She did not like discussing personal matters with strangers, especially wealthy strangers who treated people's lives like casual conversation. "She's receiving treatment," Ji-yoon answered politely but shortly. Dae-hyun noticed the wall go back up instantly. He understood he had crossed into private territory. Before he could respond, his phone suddenly buzzed across the table. He glanced down at the screen. Several missed calls. Dozens of messages. One notification immediately caught his attention. He opened a social media app. The video of Ji-yoon playing piano had exploded online. Hundreds of thousands of views already. Comments poured in faster every second. "Who is she? This is real talent. I cried listening to this. Find the pianist waitress." Even major entertainment pages had started reposting the clip. Dae-hyun frowned slightly in surprise. "This is spreading fast," he muttered. Ji-yoon looked confused. "What is?" Without thinking, Dae-hyun turned the phone toward her. The moment Ji-yoon saw the numbers climbing beside the video, her face lost color. "Oh no." Dae-hyun looked surprised by her reaction. Most people would celebrate sudden attention like this. Ji-yoon looked genuinely frightened. "I need to go," she said quickly, standing from the chair. "Wait, I don't want this online. It's already everywhere." Ji-yoon pressed her lips together tightly. Panic slowly built inside her chest. She had spent years hiding from public attention for a reason. Not because she hated music, because fame once brought painful memories she never fully escaped. After her father died, reporters in Korea briefly followed her family because of her sudden disappearance from the music world. Questions, cameras, rumors. It became overwhelming while her mother struggled emotionally and financially. Ji-yoon never wanted that life again. Now it was happening all over. Dae-hyun noticed the fear in her eyes. "This attention could help you," he said carefully. "I don't need attention. You could perform professionally again." Ji-yoon shook her head immediately. "No. You're talented enough. That life is over." Her answer came too fast, too emotional. Dae-hyun stared at her silently. He realized something important then. Ji-yoon was not someone chasing lost fame. She was someone running from it. Before either of them could continue, a familiar voice suddenly interrupted nearby. "Dae-hyun." Both turned toward the entrance. An older man wearing a dark winter coat had stepped back inside the restaurant after apparently forgetting something. The moment Dae-hyun saw him, his expression changed completely. Shock flashed across his face. "Mr. Park," he said quietly. Ji-yoon froze instantly. Park. Her father's last name. The older man approaching was not her father, of course. But hearing Dae-hyun say that name so suddenly made her heart skip. The man looked confused too. "You know me?" he asked. Dae-hyun stood slowly from his chair. For several seconds, he simply stared. Then realization slowly spread across his face. "My God," he whispered. Ji-yoon looked between them in confusion. The older man frowned slightly before recognition hit him too. His eyes widened. "You're Kang Dae-hyun?" Dae-hyun gave a stunned nod. The older man let out a breath of disbelief. "It's been 20 years. Ji-yoon looked completely lost now. "You know each other?" The older man turned toward her gently. "I worked with your father years ago," he explained, "at the shipping company in Busan." Ji-yoon's eyes widened slightly. She remembered hearing about that company as a child. Dae-hyun slowly sat back down, still staring in shock. "I haven't heard that name in years," he admitted quietly. The older man gave a faint smile. "Your face changed, but I recognized your voice." Ji-yoon could sense tension suddenly filling the air. "What's going on?" she asked softly. The older man looked toward Dae-hyun carefully before speaking. "Your father helped this man once." Ji-yoon frowned slightly. Dae-hyun lowered his gaze. Years ago, before becoming wealthy, he had been drowning in debt after a failed business project in Korea. Banks rejected him. Investors disappeared. Even friends avoided him. During that difficult time, Ji-yoon's father worked beside him at the shipping company. Unlike everyone else, he offered help. Not because he expected anything back, because he believed people deserved second chances. "He loaned me money," Dae-hyun admitted quietly. "Enough to keep my business alive." Ji-yoon stared at him in disbelief. "He never told us that." "He probably didn't think it mattered." The older man shook his head softly. "Your father always helped people quietly." Dae-hyun's face tightened with guilt. "I tried to repay him later," he said. But by then he stopped speaking. Ji-yoon understood immediately. By then, her father was gone. Silence settled heavily over the table. Everything suddenly felt strange to Ji-yoon. Only hours earlier, Dae-hyun was mocking her publicly in front of wealthy strangers. Now she was learning that her late father once helped build the life that made him successful. The irony felt unreal. Dae-hyun rubbed his forehead slowly. "If I had known who you were tonight," he muttered. Ji-yoon answered quietly, "You wouldn't have challenged me?" "No," he admitted honestly. "Never." For the first time since meeting him, Ji-yoon saw genuine shame in his expression. Not embarrassment, regret. Outside, snow continued falling heavily while the restaurant lights reflected against the glass windows. The older man placed a gentle hand on Ji-yoon's shoulder. Your father would have been proud tonight. Those words nearly broke her. Ji-yoon looked down quickly, fighting emotion rising in her chest. She had spent years wondering whether she disappointed her father by abandoning music. Hearing someone say those words aloud hurt and comforted her at the same time. Meanwhile, Dae-hyun remained unusually quiet. He kept thinking about the cruel way the night began. The jokes, the laughter, the challenge. And now he discovered the woman he humiliated was the daughter of the man who once saved his future. For the first time in many years, success no longer made him feel powerful. It made him feel small. Ji-yoon barely slept that night. Long after her shift ended at the Belmont Crown restaurant, her mind kept replaying everything that happened. The piano, the applause, the viral videos, Min-suk recognizing her, and most of all, learning that Dae-hyun Voss had once known her father. By the time she finally reached home, snow covered the streets completely. She quietly unlocked the apartment door and stepped inside, careful not to wake her mother. The small apartment was cold except for the weak heater humming near the kitchen wall. Medicine bottles sat neatly beside the sink, and unpaid hospital letters remained stacked near the table exactly where she left them that morning. Ji-yoon stared at those envelopes for a long moment. Then she slowly pulled the $5,000 check from her coat pocket. For most people, it might not seem life-changing. For her, it felt enormous. It meant more time, more treatment, less fear for a little while. She sat down quietly at the kitchen table and covered her face with both hands. The emotional weight of the night finally crashed over her completely. For years she had tried to survive one day at a time. Now suddenly, strangers online knew her name again. Her phone vibrated nonstop beside her. Notifications flooded the screen faster than she could read them. Messages from unknown people, music companies, interview requests, social media tags. The video from the restaurant had reached millions of views overnight. Ji-yoon quickly silenced the phone and pushed it away. She felt overwhelmed, not excited, just exhausted. A soft voice suddenly came from the hallway. Ji-yoon? She looked up immediately. Her mother stood near the doorway wearing a light sweater, her face pale from months of treatment. Even though she looked weak physically, her eyes still carried warmth. You're home late, her mother said gently. Ji-yoon forced a smile.
Sorry.
The restaurant was busy. But her mother quickly noticed something unusual. You've been crying. Ji-yoon tried to deny it, but her mother slowly walked closer and sat beside her at the table. What happened? For a moment, Ji-yoon did not know where to begin. Then quietly, she told her everything. The challenge, the piano, the applause, the videos online. Her mother listened silently, without interrupting. When Ji-yoon finally finished speaking, tears filled her mother's eyes. I always knew you would play again someday, she whispered. Ji-yoon shook her head immediately.
No.
Tonight was different. It was just an accident. Her mother smiled sadly. People don't react that way to accidents. Ji-yoon lowered her eyes. I don't want that life anymore. But music was your dream. It was father's dream too. Her mother reached across the table and gently held her hand. Your father never wanted music to become a burden for you. Those words stayed in Ji-yoon's mind long after both of them went to bed. The next morning, everything became even more chaotic. Before Ji-yoon could leave for work, reporters had already gathered outside the Belmont Crown restaurant. Customers lined up hoping to see the mysterious Waitress pianist from the viral video. Some carried flowers. Others held phones ready to record. Inside the restaurant, employees rushed around nervously while Mr. Han repeatedly answered phone calls from media companies. The moment Ji-yoon entered through the staff entrance, everyone turned toward her. Hyrin ran over immediately. Ji-yoon, this is insane, she whispered excitedly. A television producer called asking for you. Another waiter added, people are literally booking tables just because of you. Ji-yoon looked overwhelmed already. I just want to work normally. Hiren laughed softly. I don't think normal exists anymore. Mr. Han soon approached carrying a serious expression. There's someone here to see you, he said carefully. Jiyoon instantly became nervous again. Another reporter?
No.
He glanced toward a private dining room near the back of the restaurant. It's Dae-hyun Voss. Jiyoon froze slightly. Part of her hoped she would never see him again after last night. But another part remained curious about him now, especially after learning about her father helping him years ago. Slowly, she walked toward the private room. When she entered, Dae-hyun stood beside the window wearing a dark coat. Unlike the confident millionaire from before, he looked tired today, almost uneasy. The moment he saw her, he straightened immediately. Thank you for coming. Jiyoon remained near the doorway. I only have a few minutes. Dae-hyun nodded respectfully. That's fair. An awkward silence followed. Then, he surprised her again. I watched the video last night, he said quietly. Several times. Jiyoon said nothing. Dae-hyun continued carefully. I also spent hours thinking about your father. Her expression softened slightly at the mention of him. He was a good man, Dae-hyun said. Better than most people I've met. Jiyoon folded her arms gently. You barely knew him. Dae-hyun shook his head.
No.
I knew exactly what kind of man he was. His voice carried sincerity this time. When everyone else abandoned me, he didn't. Jiyoon listened silently. Dae-hyun walked closer, but kept respectful distance between them. I built my career because your father helped me survive long enough to continue. Jiyoon looked conflicted hearing those words. Part of her appreciated the honesty. Another part still remembered the humiliation from the restaurant. As if sensing her thoughts, Dae-hyun sighed quietly. I know apologizing doesn't erase what happened. No, Jiyoon answered honestly. He accepted that answer without argument. That's why I want to make things right. Jiyoon frowned slightly. What does that mean? Dae-hyun reached into his coat pocket and handed her a business card. I want to organize a charity concert. Jiyoon stared at him in disbelief. A concert? Yes. She immediately shook her head. Absolutely not. Please listen first. I already said no. But Dae-hyun remained calm. The money raised would go toward your mother's treatment. That made Jiyoon pause. Dae-hyun noticed instantly. You said survival became more important than music, he continued carefully. This could help both. Jiyoon looked away toward the floor. She hated how tempting the offer sounded. Medical bills continued growing every month. Some nights, she secretly wondered how much longer they could survive financially. Still, stepping back into public performance terrified her. I'm not a professional anymore, she whispered. You never stopped being talented. That's not enough. Dae-hyun studied her face quietly before speaking again. You know what I think, he asked. Jiyoon looked at him cautiously. I think you're afraid. The words hit harder than expected. Her expression tightened instantly. You don't know anything about me. You're right, Dae-hyun admitted. But I recognize fear when I see it. Jiyoon looked frustrated now. You think one performance changes everything? No, he answered softly. I think life already changed you long ago. The room became silent again. Jiyoon hated how accurate that sounded. Dae-hyun continued more gently this time. You spent years surviving. I respect that. But surviving and living are not the same thing. Jiyoon's eyes lowered slowly. No one had spoken to her this honestly in years. Not friends. Not co-workers. Not even herself. Before she could respond, her phone suddenly buzzed loudly in her pocket. She checked the screen. Hospital. Her heart immediately tightened. She answered quickly. Hello. The nurse spoke kindly, but seriously. There were complications with her mother's next treatment schedule. Additional payments would be required sooner than expected. Jiyoon closed her eyes briefly while listening. Stress washed over her instantly. After ending the call, she stood motionless for several seconds. Dae-hyun quietly understood what happened without asking. Jiyoon hated that he saw her vulnerable again. She took a slow breath and finally looked up at him. When is this concert? For the first time since she entered the room, Dae-hyun gave a small genuine smile. 1 week from now. Jiyoon still looked uncertain. I'm not promising anything. I know. And I'm not doing this for fame. I know that too. She stared at the business card in her hand. Part of her still wanted to run away from everything. But another part remembered the feeling of sitting at the piano again after all those years. For the first time in a long time, music did not only remind her of loss. It reminded her she was still alive. Outside the private room, reporters continued gathering near the restaurant entrance while online views climbed into the millions. Most people believed Jiyoon's story was only about hidden talent, but they did not understand the real battle happening inside her. Because returning to music meant reopening a part of herself she spent years trying to bury. And deep down, that frightened her more than failure ever could. The week passed faster than Jiyoon expected. Every day felt unreal. By morning, reporters still waited outside the Belmont Crown restaurant hoping to catch a glimpse of her. By afternoon, new videos and articles about the mysterious Waitress pianist spread across social media platforms around the world. By evening, messages from music companies, television programs, and event organizers filled her phone until she finally stopped checking it completely. But despite all the noise around her, Jiyoon focused on only one thing: her mother. The hospital had already confirmed that the charity concert would help cover the next stage of treatment. For the first time in months, Jiyoon felt like she could breathe without fear crushing her chest every second. Still, the idea of performing publicly again terrified her. 3 days before the concert, she entered the old theater for rehearsals. The building stood in downtown Chicago, surrounded by glowing city lights and long lines of winter traffic. Inside, the theater looked beautiful in a quiet, timeless way. Red velvet seats stretched across the large hall while golden lights shined softly above the stage. Jiyoon froze the moment she stepped inside. It reminded her too much of the concert halls she left behind years ago. Dae-hyun noticed her hesitation immediately. "You okay?" he asked gently. Jiyoon nodded, even though she was unsure herself. Workers moved around the stage preparing equipment while volunteers organized donation tables near the entrance. News about the event had spread quickly online, and nearly every seat was already sold out. Not because of Dae-hyun, because people wanted to hear Jiyoon play again. Min-suk also arrived early that afternoon. The older man smiled warmly the moment he saw Jiyoon sitting beside the piano. "You came," he said proudly. Jiyoon gave a nervous smile. "I almost didn't." Min-suk sat beside her quietly. "You know," he said softly, "many musicians spend their entire lives trying to make people feel something through music." Jiyoon looked down at the piano keys. "I'm not sure I remember how." Min-suk shook his head immediately. "You never forgot." His words stayed in her mind during rehearsal. That evening, Jiyoon practiced alone on stage after everyone else left. The empty theater echoed softly with piano notes while snow fell outside the tall glass windows. At first, her hands trembled, but little by little, the music returned naturally again. Not perfect, not polished like before, but real. And maybe that mattered more. Meanwhile, Dae-hyun sat silently in the back row watching her practice. Over the past week, something inside him had changed too. Before meeting Jiyoon, success was simple to him. Money, power, attention, those things controlled his world. Now they suddenly felt meaningless beside someone who carried so much quiet strength without asking anyone for sympathy. For the first time in years, he found himself thinking less about business and more about people. Especially the man who once helped him survive. Jiyoon's father. The night before the concert, Dae-hyun visited a small flower shop near the river. He bought white lilies and quietly drove to a cemetery outside the city. Snow covered the ground heavily. He stood silently in front of Jiyoon's father's grave for a long time. "I should have thanked you sooner," he whispered into the cold air. For years, he buried that part of his past beneath success and pride. Now standing there alone, he realized how much kindness he had forgotten along the way. The next evening, the theater filled completely. Hundreds of people waited excitedly inside while thousands more watched online through live streams and news coverage. Outside the entrance, large crowds gathered hoping for extra tickets. Reporters spoke into cameras while social media pages counted down to Jiyoon's performance. Backstage, June stood quietly near the curtain wearing a simple dark blue dress. Nothing expensive. Nothing flashy. She looked nervous enough to leave at any second. Her mother sat nearby in a wheelchair wrapped in a warm coat, smiling proudly despite her weak condition. "You don't have to be afraid," her mother whispered gently. June looked at her. "What if I fail?" Her mother smiled softly. "You already survived harder things than failure." June felt tears forming instantly. Before she could respond, Min-suk approached carrying an old music folder. "I believe this belongs to you," he said. Confused, June opened it slowly. Inside were copies of her old competition music sheets from Korea. Her hands trembled. "How did you find these?" "I kept them," Min-suk admitted with a small laugh. "I always hoped you would return someday." June stared at the pages silently. The memories hurt, but this time they also brought warmth. Suddenly, an announcer's voice echoed through the theater. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight." The audience erupted into applause. Jiun's heart pounded hard. Dae-hyun stepped onto the stage first. The same man who once publicly embarrassed her now stood beneath the theater lights, looking unusually humble. The applause slowly quieted as he approached the microphone. He looked out across the packed audience for several seconds before speaking. "A week ago," he began quietly, "I walked into a restaurant believing money gave me the right to treat people however I wanted." The audience listened silently. "I thought success meant power. I thought being important meant being admired." He paused briefly. "Then I met someone who reminded me how wrong I was." The crowd remained completely still. Dae-hyun rarely spoke honestly in public. Most people expected arrogance from him, not reflection. "I challenged a young waitress to play piano because I thought it would entertain people," he continued. "Instead, she reminded all of us what real talent, pain, and courage look like." June stood backstage frozen. She never expected him to say any of this publicly. Dae-hyun lowered his eyes briefly before continuing. "Years ago, her father helped me during the worst period of my life. I became successful because someone kind chose to believe in me when nobody else did." The theater remained silent enough to hear breathing. "I forgot that kindness somewhere along the way," he admitted softly. "Tonight is not about paying back a debt. Some debts can never truly be repaid." He looked toward the stage entrance behind the curtain. "This is about honoring a person who never stopped carrying strength inside her, even when life gave her every reason to quit." Then he stepped back from the microphone. The audience applauded warmly. Jiun stood motionless backstage, overwhelmed by emotion. Her mother gently squeezed her hand. "It's time," she whispered. Jiun nodded slowly. Then she walked onto the stage. The moment the audience saw her, thunderous applause filled the entire theater. Thousands of people stood to their feet immediately. Cameras flashed. Phones recorded. But Jiun barely noticed any of it. She only saw the piano waiting under the soft golden lights. Slowly, she sat down at the bench. The applause faded little by little until silence filled the theater completely. Jiun closed her eyes briefly. Then she began to play. The first notes floated softly through the massive hall. Beautiful, gentle, honest. Unlike the restaurant performance, this time Jiun was not playing through fear or humiliation. She was playing freely. Every emotion from the past years poured into the music naturally. Grief, loneliness, hope, love. The audience sat frozen listening. Some people cried quietly before the song even reached the middle. Even backstage workers stopped moving just to hear her play. Near the front row, Dae-hyun stared at the stage silently. For the first time in years, he felt genuinely proud of someone without wanting anything in return. Jiun's mother covered her mouth while tears rolled down her cheeks. The music grew stronger, bigger. The theater seemed completely transformed by it. Online viewers around the world flooded comment sections with emotional reactions. Clips from the concert spread instantly across social media. But inside the theater, none of that mattered. Only the music mattered. When Jiun finally played the final note, silence filled the room for one long emotional second. Then the audience exploded into applause louder than anything she had ever heard before. People stood clapping, cheering, crying. Jiyoon looked overwhelmed as tears filled her eyes again. For years she believed her story ended the day she walked away from music. But standing there beneath the lights, hearing thousands of strangers rise to their feet for her, she realized something important. Her story had not ended. It was only beginning again. And somewhere deep inside, for the first time since losing her father, Jiyoon finally felt whole again.